Okay, yep. I think we're good to go. Thanks everyone for joining in on this session. Just a bit of an explainer. So a few of these sessions are combined sessions of different work streams. And in this case, I'll be presenting workstream updates on the fluids and materials workstream. And then I'll be handing over to Brandon Marshall for updates on the fluid lifecycle management workstream. So starting with fluids and materials. So I think most of you in the room recognize a lot of faces, are kind of familiar with the fluids and materials workstream. But for those who aren't, the basic idea of fluids and materials workstream is to address some of the key challenges with immersion cooling fluids, and especially with their interactions with IT hardware, right? So we're kind of covering this broad range of topics. Initially, we started off actually as a small focus group from the main immersion call, and some of those original calls, we had 5 or 10 people on them, right? We were focused on material compatibility. And over the last couple of years, this has expanded really quickly, right? So for those of you who join the calls, nowadays we see 40 plus people joining our bi-weekly calls. We have over 115 people on the mailing list. And it's really become this meeting point of a few different areas, right? So we have a lot of representation from fluid vendors, but also a lot of representation from server vendors, chip manufacturers, power and networking vendors, and a whole bunch of others, right? So it's kind of this meeting point of the fluids and the chemistry, but also the integration into systems. So we gave a presentation. I gave a presentation in Prague last year at the regional summit. We were talking about some of the key challenges facing immersion fluids. And so a lot of you will be familiar with these as well. We had material compatibility was one, component and system reliability, signal integrity, standards, server and tank cleaning procedures, and an accelerated aging test for fluids. These are just some, and we can go on and on about all the different challenges. But the approach since then has really been, given that we have so many challenges, let's pick out kind of the really priority ones for us as a community right now, and just really focus on those, right? So channeling all those efforts and energies into just a few key topics. And so what that spawned were a number of focus groups, which kicked off after the last regional summit. So what I'm presenting today is all work that's happened in the last year. So first we had a focus group that started on ignition, failure modes, and effects analysis. This has been a focus group that's led by Amy Short. And she has been spent the last year or so trying to cover all the different angles that's associated with that topic, right? It came initially from this discussion about auto ignition temperatures, and then I think kind of spawned into a whole different area. I think she's going to give a brief update on that later in her presentation on the requirements workstream. Then we have oxidation methodology. So this is a focus group that was about coming up with a common, consistent methodology to test oxidation of immersion fluids. Again, a few people were using different standards, so it's about how do we come up with a consistent method there. I'll do a deep dive onto that a little bit later. Then we have component compatibility. So this was really a follow-up from the previous work effort, which was focused on material compatibility. For those of you who were here yesterday in the liquid cooling bazaar, you would have heard us answering some questions around this. So this is really the extension to that previous effort. And again, I'll present some updates on that. Safe handling guidelines. This was spawned out of, I think, the concerns that were coming out around when I start bringing these fluids into data centers, what are the safety challenges there that we need to tackle? What are the adaptations I need to make to my building to handle that? And so we've got, after this session, a whole session that will be explaining the work that's been done there and the white paper that we're about to publish. And then lastly, we had a server cleaning guidelines focus group. This is one that hasn't really gotten off the ground yet, so I'm going to touch on that at the end as well. So in terms of progress, just really quickly, where are we at with the different focus groups? Like I said, they're all going at their own pace. Failure modes and effects analysis, like I said, it's been well underway. There are weekly meetings there, so it's still in the data gathering phase, but they have collected a lot of data, which is great to see. Oxidation methodology is also in this data gathering phase, still open and encouraging new participants. Component compatibility is something that's really ramping up in the last 2 months or so. I know some of you are involved in that. That's a spin-off work stream now because of the importance and because of the participation in that. That's been turned into a new work stream. Then we have cleaning guidelines, which, like I said, hasn't really gotten off the ground yet, so more on that later. And then lastly, the safe handling guidelines, which is we're about to publish this white paper. So just kind of a deeper dive into some of those topics, just to give you a snapshot of where we're at and present some of the work that's been done. So safe handling guidelines, like I said, after this we'll have a full presentation on this, so I won't spend too much time. Like I said, it's really about providing guidelines and best practices for the safe handling of all these fluids. So we're including here, we had a broad scope to include all the different fluids in immersion cooling, hydrocarbons, esters, and fluorinated liquids. And for me, I think the simplest way to summarize is that it's like a practical interpretation of the safety data sheet, right? So we're not trying to supersede guidance from the data sheet or fluid vendors, but it's about bridging that gap between the knowledge you might find in a data sheet with the people who have to operate and run immersion-cooled data centers. I encourage you to stick around for that, and we'll go into more details on the content. Oxidation methodology. So the goals here were really, like I mentioned before, reviewing the existing oxidation methods. That was the first thing that we already completed. So we looked at different standards, IEC standards, ASTM standards that might be relevant. They don't have any immersion cooling standards yet. The two that we kind of settled on initially that seemed to be used by some and one used by some and the other used by others was IEC 61125 and the ASTM D2112. And they're both quite different methods, test methods. It's interesting comparing and contrasting some of the results there. We have started to get in some data from deployments, real deployments, and we're trying to actively correlate that to some of the test results, right? So I don't normally like putting tables like this on a slide, but it's just to kind of give you a snapshot of what the exercise we're doing right now in reaching out to some of the immersion cooling vendors to get samples for them from their fluids, to then look at how they're tracking along. That's a really common question a lot of people ask, right? Is how long is this stuff going to last? And you can see here that there are some quite old samples at this point that are coming in, and the properties are more than reasonable for the age that they've been deployed. So another focus group I wanted to really touch on was component compatibility, like I mentioned before. This is being led by Samantha Yates from Intel. So yeah, the goal here is really to extend beyond just pure materials, bulk materials, into that component space. So here you can see, you know, a kind of high-level breakdown of different components of a server, just to give a sense of all the different components we might be talking about. And what the previous work didn't really cover was that functional component testing and beyond just pure physical properties, the types of things that you might want to look at and test when it comes to testing components. So far, really quick update is, glossary was really important. Lots of different terms and terminology was being used before. So now we have a consistent glossary, that's great. And I think it's on this side, yeah, so, and now they're actively working on a white paper. The participation in this white paper is already closed. We had that open for a while, so unfortunately, to keep things concise, we're not opening membership to that anymore. What there will be is later, once the white paper draft is published, that will be open for comment. I'm just going to move on quickly. So, yeah, future focus groups. This is what I really wanted to encourage. So one of the focus groups I mentioned that didn't get off the ground was the cleaning procedure focus group. This is something that we touch on a little bit in the safe handling guidelines, but we do think there needs to be a complete white paper on this, on the best practices. So what we've talked about, we have had several discussions that haven't fully gained steam yet, but we have had discussions around best practices for cleaning components, cleaning servers, and cleaning tanks, right? As you can imagine, they're kind of quite different procedures. And I really encourage anyone who does have experience with hands-on experience, ideally, with using some of these cleaning methods to please reach out and join in on the calls. We'll have a couple of kickoff calls on the main call, and then I think we'll break out into the focus group. And that's it for me, so I'm going to hand over to Brandon now to talk about the fluid life cycle management.
Thank you very much. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about the newest work stream that we have in the immersion cooling side of things, which is really around fluid life cycle management. As we all saw in Rolf's charts, the market is starting to grow quickly. And one of the topics that hasn't been addressed by industry extensively is, what do we do with a fluid at its end of life? Where does it go? How do we track that? And in a time where sustainability objectives are becoming more and more important, and everybody's trying to track to a granular level the particular impact that their decisions have on their operations and on the planet, it's important to start articulating how these different options and where these fluids needs to go once they're done. I will highlight that this work stream is also co-chaired by Chris Fletcher from BP. She's not able to join us here today, so she's joining us in spirit or remotely, so we can say hello to her. But she will also be helping to cover and bringing her expertise around the single-phase oil side of things. So to give a brief introduction of this work stream, why were we chartered and what are we really going to be working on? So up front, we want to be able to provide guidance on different disposal options that one would have for fluids, both single-phase and two-phase. Once it's reached its end of its usable life, the server equipment's coming out, everything needs to be changed over. Where do I actually put this? And in a lot of cases, there's multiple different routes that a user can take with these different fluids. You have the options of going through and looking at recycling. You can look at destruction. You can also look at going through and reprocessing different fluids, such as oils. Each of these decisions and each of these different paths that you can take have different implications on how you would, number one, measure what that impact would look like to your sustainability objectives, and also what you could do with that fluid thereafter, right? Very different process if you're recycling something for reuse versus reprocessing it for use in a different application. Now, this is a very large topic, and being a new working group, we've only started off, we're on our 4th meeting now, so I think we're in the infancy, that's still fair to say. But we will be also covering a couple other different topics that we've deprioritized up front in order to focus on this major objective first. We'll be looking at going through and establishing across all of different work streams in OCP a common vocabulary that we can use for disposal options. I think for a lot of us that have played around, dabbled, or are involved in the sustainability space today, there's not really a good dictionary on all of this. It's really an ever-evolving space. So it's up to us up front, especially when we start talking about a measurement system and outlining these different paths, that we establish that common core vocabulary so we're all speaking the same language in the future. And for those users who are actually reporting these different impacts, either in a sustainability report or even just internally, has a reference to go back to understand where those should be placed. Now, outside of that, we're going to be collaborating with several of the existing work groups that already exist inside of OCP. There's a lot going on, of course, with fluids and materials. This is why Peter and I are sharing a stage today. We have a little bit of overlap in what we're doing. But there's also different groups that are already working on things like Common Core LCAs to understand what the different impacts of fluid and technology options can be. Now, Chris and I are very pragmatic in how we want to move this forward. So this is our initial pass as to when we think we're going to be able to start putting out some deliverables. In Q1 of this year, we really kicked things off. We put out a general call for people to join the working group. Right now, we have only 33 people that are signed up for our mailing list, and we have about 8 folks that actually join our calls. We'll come to that at the end in the call to action, but again, still pretty small in comparison to some of the other groups that are working right now. Through Q2 and Q3, what we would like to do, especially with the expertise that we already have in the group, is to have our first draft of an initial white paper around what those disposal options can look like, as well as a proposed measurement system for how you can look at the impacts of those disposal options. Okay? We will need to establish some focus groups to help bring a little bit more clarity to different topics, right? Although we can talk about how best to recycle an oil or how best to recycle a fluorinated fluid, when it comes to an LCA and how we actually go through and measure some of these impacts, we're going to need to lean into other subject matter expertise. Now, when you think about where we're going to go into the Q3, late Q3, early Q4 timeframe, this is really when we're going to want to start going into our revision 2. So we'll collect feedback from the groups and different groups that we're already interacting with, as well as OCP leadership feedback. And then we'll go through and we'll look to draft a second revision of this paper by the end of this year. Now, although this is a really big topic, the way that we're breaking it down and kind of truncating it, especially with the different types of disposal and recycling options that exist today, we feel this is pretty achievable. We're not coming up with something that's new and novel. A lot of these paths already exist. It's just about consolidating that information and making sure that we have everything documented appropriately. Okay, so to break this down and where we are today, the Sustainability Working Group as well as the Fluids and Materials Working Group are going to be 2 of the more important partners that we have as we start to get this kicked off. We will have our core working team for fluid lifecycle management, of course, that's sitting in the middle of this. But as of right now, we've identified our 2 major gaps that we have in the focus groups that we'll be looking to establish in the future, which is going to be how we establish a measurement system, CO2 equivalents, for example, to help understand the different impacts here and have that common core baseline. The other area that we're going to need some support is on destruction technologies, right? Now, while out there's the most basic and known being incineration, there are actually a lot of companies out there that have developed pretty disruptive and new ways of actually destroying different materials, whether oils or fluorinated fluids. As an example, a company known as Agas, they're a global company. They operate a group called Plyoplast. They actually have an incineration method that goes up to 10,000 degrees C. It pretty much incinerates anything that you run through it. So we want to make sure that we're capturing that because especially as we talk about a measurement system and when you think about emissions, depending on that path that you take and what type of technology you use, you may have more or less of an impact. Okay, so to finish things off, we have our links up here. There's a lot of information between both of our groups, and I'll let Peter comment on a couple points as well here. Really, our call to action right now with where we are is we are looking for subject matter expertise and for people to join, right? The best opportunity to get your voice and to get your voice in early is really when we're at these kind of ground floor stages. We're going through and looking for co-authors to help us start putting together different sections of this paper. And if you do have expertise either working in this area, if you're working at a company today that has expertise on how to recycle, reprocess, or to destroy different products, or if you're even just looking to get involved and to learn and you can bring some expertise or experience that you've had from working in different parts of the industry, it's very much welcome. Okay. Any last thoughts from your side, Peter, on this?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to comment on, since Rolf preceded this talk with the updated vision of the new Immersion project structure, right? So I think in terms of the fluids and materials work stream, you would have seen there's going to be a fluids. The proposal is to have a fluids committee, And so I think what we'll see happen over the next few months is we'll start transitioning towards that new structure. I would encourage anyone who's interested in getting involved to keep joining these calls for updated information about that. Let's see how we can best do that transition, and also work on some new focus groups. Right, I didn't mention that, but definitely this year we're looking at kicking off new focus groups. So if any of those challenges, for example, seem like they're a top priority for you, then definitely get involved, jump on the calls, and we'd love to have more leadership as well. So yeah, nothing else from you? All right. So thank you, and I think we'll have 5 minutes for questions before the next call. Questions? Yeah. I think we've only got this mic again, right? So.
I don't wish to be pedantic, but fluid is actually air and liquid, yeah. So it's a gas and liquid, but should we really be calling it liquids and materials? I don't know. We're talking about liquid cooling, yeah. So, sorry, fluid mechanics is a subject of gases and liquids that flow.
Yeah, applause. We all know he's right? It is the immersion sub-project though, so it's immersing in a fluid, which is true.
Thank you for your presentation, and yeah, I agree with John. But anyway, I'm just saying that if you didn't hear our presentation before lunch, you were asking basically for a data dictionary. And we have put together a data dictionary of 300 terms in terms of heat reuse, but also in terms of things involved within a data center. So I think that we and other work streams actually, since I guess a few of us are here, could work together with creating a huge data dictionary of maybe an OCP data dictionary. I don't know. But in any case, we would have data for you to use. Yeah, and fluid is also defined, thank you.
It's a good one to chip into as well, because there has been quite a lot of effort within the project as well. What we've created is a cooling environments glossary, which is this dictionary, and this work is going to be added to it. And we will be looking forward to working with you on harmonizing the dictionary as well. There's already a lot of work that's been put into it. And we're currently evangelizing that with the rest of the project as well. So let's be in touch.
Excellent.
Any more questions? Yeah, sure.
Thanks. If you just go back a couple of slides to where you talked about the destruction and what you guys are focusing on from an LCA point of view. So I guess, yeah, when you look at the focus groups, question or kind of clarification, when you look at the destruction technologies, are you also looking at recycling and reuse? Because I guess from a hierarchy perspective, you obviously want to minimize your destruction where possible, right? So if you could expand on that a little bit more, that'd be great to hear.
Yeah, definitely. Great question. So we are going to be focusing on recycling and reprocessing. A lot of those technologies are pretty well known today, though. So between Chemours, which is the company that I represent, as well as BP, and then members that we have on the work stream from other companies as well, we have a pretty good view as to what can actually be done with these fluids today. We can work on our vocabulary around this as well. In terms of the destruction piece, right now for us, that's where it's a little bit more unknown, because there's been a lot of different improvements and new technologies that have come out in the destruction space. So we want to make sure that we have an accounting of those that are actually out there that we can find, that we have access to, but also what may be coming up in the near future. So again, we'll probably put out a general call to try to get additional information in the future. We'll always seek additional feedback from the community as well. So what's going to be important is once that revision 1 of the document comes out, we'll be circulating that broadly. And if somebody does feel that we missed something, that's where we'll look to incorporate it and engage with them directly.